1917. Almost immediately after the overthrow of the interim government, the Council of People's Commissars adopted a Declaration of the Rights of the Peoples of Russia, which proclaimed the right of all peoples to self-determination. The Finnish Senate immediately decided to take advantage of this opportunity, which on December 5, 1917, proclaimed Finland an independent state, with which, in turn, the government of Soviet Russia agreed. Already at the beginning of 1918, a civil war began in Finland, during which Soviet Russia supported the Red Guard of Finland, and Germany and Sweden supported their opponents of the White Finland. Already in May, thanks to the active participation of the German and Swedish armies, as well as detachments of the former Russian army, the Red Guard of Finland was defeated. Immediately after the victory in the Civil War, taking advantage of the fact that the Civil War in Soviet Russia was only gaining momentum, the Finnish army invaded eastern Karelia, planning to incorporate it into Finland. By the summer of 1920, the Red Army, having gathered its strength, was able to oust the Finnish troops from almost the entire territory of eastern Karelia, but since the civil war in Russia was in full swing, the government of Soviet Russia was forced to conclude the Treaty of Tartu, under the terms of which the Pechanga region remained under the control of Finland as well as part of the Rybaki Peninsula and the Middle Peninsula. In 1932, a non-aggression pact was concluded between the Soviet Union and Finland, but despite this, relations between the two states remained very tense. In 1939, it became obvious to the Soviet leadership that, despite the signed non-aggression pact, the likelihood of starting a war with Germany was quite high. In this situation, it was necessary to ensure the security of Leningrad, which was an important industrial center, and Murmansk. The Soviet government came up with a proposal according to which Finland was to move its border 90 kilometers from Leningrad, and also transfer to the Soviet Union its part of the Rybaki and Sredny peninsulas, as well as the islands of Gotland, Loven-Sari, Jutjarsari and Saiskari. In exchange for this, Finland was given a territory in Karelia, the area of which was twice the territory transferred to the Soviet Union. Finland refused the offer of the Soviet Union, since in the territories that the Soviet government planned to receive there was a complex of defensive structures, better known as the Mannerheim line, which had been built for 10 years. It was not possible to agree, and on October 10, 1939, Finland called up soldiers from the reserve for unscheduled exercises, which in fact was a general mobilization. In turn, the Soviet Union also began preparations for the upcoming war. The Soviet command, not having accurate information about the presence of a complex of defensive structures in the enemy, planned to launch simultaneous strikes in 3 directions and force Finland to capitulate. At the same time, the Finnish army planned to take up defense and hold out for at least 6 months, hoping by this time to wait for help from the states of Western Europe. By the beginning of hostilities, the Crane Army concentrated a powerful grouping on the border with Finland, which consisted of 400,000 soldiers, 1,476 tanks and 1,000 aircraft, while at the same time the Finnish army had 265,000 soldiers, 64 tanks and 270 aircraft. The Soviet command concentrated the main forces on the Karelian Isthmus. The fact is that, having broken through the enemy's defenses in this place, the Red Army could enter the operational space and, using its advantage in numbers and military equipment, create a threat to capture Helsinki and thereby force Finland to capitulate. In the remaining areas, the Soviet command planned to operate with relatively small groups of troops, since a large number of forests and lakes did not allow for an offensive on a wide front, and the lack of a developed road network in Karelia did not allow supplying large military formations. The plans of the Red Army were also obvious to the Finnish command, which also concentrated its main forces on the Karelian Isthmus. The reason for the start of hostilities was the so-called Manila incident. On November 26, the Soviet government announced that the Finnish army had fired on the border territory of the USSR near the village of Manila and demanded that Finnish troops be withdrawn from the border. In turn, Finland stated that the shelling was carried out from Soviet territory and proposed a joint investigation mutual withdrawal of troops from the border. On November 29, 1939, the Soviet Union severed diplomatic relations with Finland. The fighting began on November 30. The 7th Army advancing on the Karelian Isthmus began to push the Finnish troops and by December 6 was able to occupy the border territory from Finland, after which it encountered a serious obstacle in the form of the Mannerheim Line defensive structures in the area of the Taipale River. Almost immediately after the first attempts to break through the Mannerheim Line, it became obvious that the 7th Army did not have enough large-caliber artillery to overcome the enemy's fortifications, and Soviet tanks whose gun caliber did not exceed 45 mm were not able to effectively destroy Finnish bunkers. Only on December 12, having suffered serious losses, did the Red Army manage to overcome the Mannerheim Line security zone and reach the main defense zone. Meanwhile, the 14th Army launched an offensive from the Murmansk region. By the evening of November 30, she managed to push the enemy from the Rybaki and Sredny peninsulas to continue the offensive deep into enemy territory. By December 3, the Red Army managed to occupy the villages of Petsamo and Luostari. Continuing the offensive, the Red Army established control over the village of Salmijärvi by December 15, and on December 19, after receiving the appropriate order, the 14th Army stopped the offensive and went on the defensive. If the Red Army managed to achieve some success on the Karelian Isthmus and in the Arctic, then in the central part of the front, from the very first days of the offensive, it faced serious problems. The fact is that the wooded and swampy terrain, as well as the lack of a developed road network in central Karelia, significantly complicated the supply of the Red Army and forced it to move in long columns. In turn, the Finnish army skillfully used the difficult terrain of the theater of operations. Mobile detachments of Finnish skiers ambushed the columns of the Red Army, trying to cut them off from the main forces and destroy them. This tactic gave results and the Red Army suffered serious losses. Nevertheless, the Red Army continued to move and on December 10 managed to establish control over the city of Pitkiranta on the shores of Lake Ladoga. Trying to break deep into the territory of Finland and get out into a space suitable for maneuver, the 8th Army continued to move. On December 12, the 139th Rifle Division near Lake Talvojärvi was ambushed by the Finnish army. The Finns managed to take serious losses to the 139th Division and push it back. The Finns also managed to surround the 168th Division advancing on the city of Sortavala, which continued to fight surrounded until the very end of the war. The 9th Army, which was advancing to the north, also failed to achieve serious results. On December 7, she managed to occupy the village of Suomussalmi, but 2 divisions of this army were encircled during the offensive and were forced to break back, while losing a large amount of equipment and personnel. In the second half of December, it became obvious that the original offensive plan had failed, so the Red Army received an order to stop offensive operations and a temporary lull began at the front. At this time, the Soviet command decided to abandon attempts to attack in secondary directions and focus on overcoming the Mannerheim Line in order to enter the operational space. The Red Army received additional forces. Also, special artillery destruction groups were created, which were supposed to destroy the Finnish fortifications. In addition, the Red Army received samples of new tanks such as the SMK, KV and T-100, which were armed with 76mm guns, the firepower of which was enough to destroy pillboxes and bunkers. Meanwhile, Finland began to actively receive assistance in the form of volunteers and weapons from France, Great Britain, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, Italy and the United States. Germany, which did not want to violate the non-aggression pact with the USSR ahead of time, secretly supplied Finland with captured weapons captured in Poland, and then concluded an agreement with Sweden according to which it undertook to reimburse all the weapons that Sweden would transfer to Finland. The Finnish army, trying to disrupt the preparation of the Red Army for the upcoming offensive on December 26, she tried to counterattack on the Karelian Isthmus, but having suffered serious losses and not having achieved any results, she was forced to return to her original positions. The preparation of the Red Army was completed by the end of January 1940, and on February 1st, Soviet aviation began a massive bombardment of the rear of the enemy. At the same time, the Finnish fortifications in the Suma region were subjected to powerful artillery fire. On February 6, the Red Army, supported by aviation and tanks, launched an offensive to break through the Mannerheim line. The Finnish detachments offered fierce resistance, and by February 7, the Red Army managed to advance only in the Moola area. After regrouping and pulling up reserves, the Red Army on February 11 launched a new attack on the Mannerheim line. After a powerful artillery preparation, the detachments of the Red Army again went on the offensive. The main blow was directed to the Suma area. This time, with the support of tanks, the Red Army managed to almost immediately break through the defenses of the Finnish army, capturing the central pillbox number 4, which allowed it to advance towards the isthmus between two lakes. Already on February 13, the main line of Finnish fortifications in the Suojärvi region was broken through and the Red Army continued its offensive towards the Kamara station. Detachments of the Red Army went deep into the Finnish defense for 6 kilometers and began to expand the breakthrough area. Already on February 16, the Kamaria station fell into the hands of the Red Army. On February 26, the Finnish army tried to recapture the village of Hankaniemi. The attack turned out to be very unsuccessful since all the Finnish tanks were destroyed by the Soviet tank company. The Finns continued to put up fierce resistance, but the Red Army moved forward and on March 2 reached the outskirts of Viborg. Mannerheim was an experienced commander and was well aware that after the occupation of Viborg, the Red Army would enter the operational space, and, consequently, the Finnish army would no longer be able to stop it on the way to Helsinki. In this situation, the Finnish government turned to the Soviet government with a proposal to hold peace talks, which began in Moscow on March 7. Already on March 12, a peace treaty was signed, under the terms of which Finland transferred to the Soviet Union all the territories that it claimed in 1939, offering a territorial exchange, as well as the city of Viborg and adjacent territories, the northern coast of Lake Ladoga, and the Salla-Kuusamo region. This ended the Winter War. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so as not to miss new videos.